You want me to be honest, it's really hard for me not to go scorched earth on Checo Perez. It feels like it would be ever so slightly classless for me to dance on his grave. But he makes it hard for me, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, because of what's come before. You guys know that I dine at sporting excellence each and every single time. Maximilian Verstappen, that's why we talk about him so much on this channel. Conversely then, as far as Checo Perez is concerned, it feels like something of a meritocracy or lack thereof. Nepotism per se. Money and financial resources over meritocracy indeed. That's why Checo Perez still has a seat, or at least did have, as at December 2024, no longer. Let me tell you why it's hard for me not to go scorched earth. So many Checo Perez fans have been in the chat. Oh, Cameron, what about Checo Perez now? All the while I'm portending the eventuality that Checo Perez was not going to be driving for the Bulls that are red as at 2024. Oh, Cameron, you've been saying this for months now. That's because the goalposts kept moving. For the avoidance of doubt, they were this close to sacking Checo Perez the Monday after the summer break. Of course they were. They said as much that they were meeting. There was a meeting at least between one Helmut Marko and Christian Horner, and their intention then was to get rid, jettison, flotsam and jetsam F1 in the man formerly known as the Mexican Minister of Defense. That was their plan then. What happened then, though? A bit of a smokescreen. Liberty Media, some say, had a word with Red Bull and said, are you really looking to get rid of the only Mexican driver on the grid ahead of October the 27th and the Mexican Grand Prix, when so many Mexican fans have bought tickets to see their hero? Is that really a wise decision, Christian Helmut? You really want to make that decision and go into Mexico, the area where Maximilian Verstappen got D-threats this time last year? Is that a sensible decision, Christian? Oh, and bear in mind, the documentary's just dropped, No Te Rindas Cabrón, that speaks about Checo Perez glowingly and reminisces on his ability to overcome adversity in extremis, almost in perpetuity, and you're going to sack him on the day when that documentary comes out. That looks like Red Bull. The left F1 hand is not talking to the right. That serves no purpose. Again, if we're talking about serving the God that is the financial resources, Liberty Media have a duty to shareholders to continue growing the sport into growth markets. By the way, Checo Perez, being the only Mexican driver on the grid, served that purpose. Therefore, there was a commercial interest. There is commercial value every single time to consider. Carlos Slim sponsors Checo Perez to the tune, or at least did do, to the tune of $20 million US each and every single year via Telemex. And that has to mean something. And again, how much merchandise does Checo Perez sell in that part of the world? How much? A lot is the answer that you're looking for. How many energy drinks called Red Bull does Checo Perez sell in North America and South America? A lot of them. Hence why it was a difficult decision, because there is always commercial value to be considered in these. But yet and still, if I go back to the original point, it's difficult for me not to celebrate. Not because Checo Perez, because listen, he's a nice guy, right? Performance aside, I think he's a decent dude, family man, etc., etc. But the way the fans have behaved, the way his father's behaved, and the way to a certain extent he's behaved, and the words that have come out of his mouth, it makes you have a tinge at least of Schadenfreude. No, let's go through line by line. Antonio Perez Garibay, most recently, Checo Perez's dad, had some things to say about Ralf Schumacher, didn't he? He said, I don't know who that dude is. Is he a man? Is he a woman? Again, hateful speech, if ever I've heard it, saying that he doesn't know anything about Checo Perez. But Ralf Schumacher was only saying the truth, that by dint of Checo Perez's material underperformance season today, as versus what's being expected of him by Horner, Helmut Marko and Red Bull more broadly, Charlie Mavija family, that his time is limited, that the sword of Damocles will be wielded on his head as far as his career as an F1 driver imminently. Ralf Schumacher was right, Antonio Perez Garibay. You, sir, were wrong. Always flapping your gums when it was no better time than now to stay silent because, again, of the not insubstantial underperformance of your son. If it was Max Verstappen and you were Jos Verstappen, then you can talk, right? You can flap your gums, go hard each and every single time, cool. Because your son is four-time champion, then he's not missing a beat on track. But surely when your son's underperforming, now is as good a time as ever to surely plead the fifth. Radio silence settings, Antonio Perez Garibay, because you're not making things better with your hateful speech, talking as if Checo Perez is Max Verstappen when he's anything but. Oh, and by the way, you'll recall, Checo Perez thought it a good idea to get onto Instagram when everybody was speculating about what would happen to him. Why have Red Bull not got rid of him already? Why did they not sign Carlos Sainz Jr. when they had the opportunity? Checo thought it was apropos to get onto Instagram and post the Wolf of Wall Street meme. I'm not leaving, per Leonardo DiCaprio. That's what he said, and that's what he posted, as if Checo Perez, you had a say in this matter. And that's why, for me, as a consumer of F1 who watches his sport through the lens of sporting excellence, it's hard for me not to have a bit of schadenfreude, to not give a wink and a nudge to karmic justice and its timing, because his team have been talking too much for far too long. Wonder if they're paying his 20 million in installments. Sharifson, I've heard it's anywhere to the tune of 16. He's only going on sabbatical anyway. Do you know what I mean? He'll be back at some point. Christian Horner, in an interview, said that he's going to take some time away. We'll go through that in short order, but I want to dissect for the precursor, because there's been a lot going on leading up to here. Other reporters have said Sky Germany, ESPN Australia. There's been a load of them that have come out. Canal Plus 2 said that this was imminent. Helmut Marko 2 said that we would get news at some point this week on a podcast. So it was a matter of when, not if. Get it right, Cameron. Sort out your verbiage and your enunciation for once. It was always going to be a matter of timing even. So I'm reporting this. I'm talking about it all this while. People are saying, oh, you're too soon, Cameron. You've been talking about this for months. That's because the goalpost kept moving. They intended to get rid of him the Monday of summer break. The very first one. It didn't happen because of limited media, because of the Mexican Grand Prix, because of No Te Rindas Cabrón as a documentary. The timing was off. They were desperate to get rid of him again shortly thereafter, but you don't get rid of Checo Perez before Singapore and Baku. Why? Well, because he's a rear limited merchant around those medium duration, low speed turns. Checo Perez is God tier. He is and always will. Why? Because his penchant, the way his style works, is that he's brilliant at getting on the throttle on combined exit, is now and always has been, hence why you could beat from time to time with a bit of fortuitous circumstances a Max Verstappen in 2022 at the Monte Carlo Grand Prix. That's why he's got wins at Singapore and Baku. Every once in a while he was going to be God tier there because those tracks suited his style. It became the modus operandi, even the trend that in H1 you were going to see him do one of these, and then he was going to talk about how he was going to become champion. Antonio Perez Garibay, his father, was going to say, oh, when my son gets wheels sufficient underneath him, he's going to be a champion one day. It was all about the Checo Perez bluster. But as we got out of H1 into H2 and the old school tracks, a Silverstone, a Spa-Francorchamps as an example, a Hungary or an Austria, that's when Checo Perez was always going to struggle because his style didn't suit those fast flowy tracks. He can't nail a Max Verstappen or a Sir Lewis or a Charles Leclerc around the Maggots and Beckett's because that's not him. Those fast front limited type turns, medium to high speed, short duration, he's got no chance of beating those guys around there because again he's a rear limited merchant. But this story is as old as the hills as far as Checo Perez is concerned. And listen, Schadenfreude is the feeling and karmic justice. I'm happy in a certain sense, even though I don't want to dance on anybody's grave. His message, by the way, Checo Perez chose to get on Twitter and Instagram again and espouse his emotions in real time, express what he feels. Here's what Checo Perez had to say about the news that again he's decided that they've come to a mutual agreement to part ways, both Checo Perez, man formerly known as the Mexican Minister of Defense, and the one they call the Bulls that are red. Here's what Checo had to say. After 4 incredible seasons together, Oracle Red Bull Racing and Checo Perez have reached an agreement, have reached an agreement to part ways. During this time, Checo Perez played a crucial role in securing multiple Grand Prix wins, countless podiums, finishes, and 2 Constructors' World Championships, significantly contributed to the team's most successful era in Formula One. Reflecting on his time with Red Bull Racing, Sergio said the following, and Sharison, you're far too kind as always, mate. Maybe it will be an instalment, I don't know. Maybe they'll be keen to get that spend out the way so it doesn't get included in their cost cap for 2025. Checo Perez said as follows, and I quote, "I'm incredibly grateful for the past 4 years with Red Bull and for the opportunity to race with such an amazing team. Driving Red Bull has been an unforgettable experience." Yeah, no kidding, Sherlock. Pressure, any. Doesn't suit your style, any. Need a bit of understeer but can't get it because it's front. It's all about being on the nose like your teammate Max Verstappen once. This is what you said, Checo Perez, that you couldn't get the car that you wanted because they wouldn't develop it for you, and now we're saying it's been a pleasure. Spot the difference. He continues, "And I always cherish the success we've achieved together. We broke records, reached remarkable milestones, and I've had the privilege of meeting so many incredible people along the way." Cool. He continues, "A big thank you to every person in the team, from the management, engineers and mechanics, caterers, cost cap settings, hospitality, kitchen, marketing and commissions, as well as everybody at Milton Keynes. I wish you all the best for the future. It's also been an honour to race alongside Max as a teammate all these years and to share in our success." Well, that's not what you were saying the other day, Max. You were saying that any young buck that comes into the team is going to have nightmares racing along Max Verstappen, as you did too, sir, as a fully grown man and veteran of an F1 peddler. He continues, "Finally, a special thank you to the fans around the world and especially to the Mexican fans for your unwavering support every day. We'll meet again soon, and remember, never give up," aka No Te Rindas, cabron, name of his documentary. Oh, the humanity. What are we doing here? Checo exceeded his U-by day. Indeed, B. Menden. I think he became obsolete to a certain extent, and I will get to that because I feel like Christian Horner crystallizes it in his interview with Sky Sports F1. Had to go away and transcribe it, and we'll deep dive that shortly, I promise you. Josie says, "No more excuses for Red Bull Racing. No more Checo to blame for not winning the Constructors, even though they had third fastest car and knew walked out the door." Mate, is that where we're going? It's a bit techie with that. They've got to, surely, look, because of the points differential, and we'll get to this because Horner talks about it, because the points differential was so large, if there were a scapegoat, surely you've got to point that scapegoat finger at Checo Perez before you point it at Adrian Newey. Surely. I mean, Max Verstappen, it hasn't happened. These are unprecedented circumstances. I will tell you from memory, it hasn't happened too many times in F1 history where a driver has won a driver's championship in a car that in that same year hasn't won the Constructors' Championship. Very, very rarely. There's only 3, I can't remember, from memory, it's like 3 or 4 times ever. Senna didn't do it. I'll tell you that much. So it gets techie. Of course they've got to, if we're cutting up the culpability pie, of course Checo Perez, man formerly known as the Mexican Minister of Defense, has to take the lion's share if, again, we're talking about why, the reasons why and how Red Bull Racing didn't manage to win the Constructors' Championship. You simply must, unless we are an abbot of unreason, Chiba says. Checo is probably going to go endurance cars. Is that what you think, Chiba? So go on, because if we're talking about what Checo does next after his sabbatical, Cadillac F1 joined the grid in 2026, and the rumour is they could use a North American driver. Can you think of anybody? Anyone that's free? Mexican Minister of Defense potentially. Maybe they will reach out to a marketing mogul, a marketing cheat code even, in one Danny Rick for Cadillac F1 2026. You heard it here first, but that's what I'm hearing. It's going to get tacky. Javier says, Yuki, let's go. We'll talk about who's going to supersede, but because Christian talks about that in a minute. It's going to get tacky. Chiba, I don't think I want to see Checo in Endure. I don't know. This shows how intelligent Max fought on track. Many criticised him, but he won by being smart. We'll talk about that very briefly as well, Daniel, because I was listening to a Helmut Marko interview that I wanted to... The intention, as I thought this news would never bloody come out, was to talk about the Helmut Marko diatribe for that, because he gave an interview and he talked at length about Max Verstappen's strengths. Probably we'll save that tomorrow. Go on then, let's talk about what Christian Horner had to say, doing an interview about this circumstance with one Craig Slater on Sky Sports F1 channel. It was brief, but it was punchy as ever from Christian Horner, the team principal of the Bulls that are red. And there are digs in there, hence why the title of this video, before everybody, oh, when did you get to the point about Christian Horner destroying Sergio Checo Perez? Well, we're getting to it. Christian Horner, super sly as always, banterous or banterful even in his tone, but there are some serious things, serious messages that he's dropping if you read between the lines. Craig Slater asks his opening gambit, like, how did this come about? Like, what happened? Like, Checo Perez is gone now. Like, what's going on? Mutual agreement. Like, what's the crack? Christian Horner responds, yeah, he reflected. Checo Perez has decided to take some time out. It's sad to see him leave the team, but he's decided to go and take some time with his family and then thereafter decide what he wants to do with the rest of his life. Oh, the humanity. It sounds very final, eh? Now, when we're talking about agreement, we know already that they wanted to keep him in-house, keep him as an ambassador so they don't lose all of those hundreds of thousands of merch and energy drinks that they're selling in the part of the world from which one Checo Perez hails. And that's got to mean something. They don't want to give him to Cadillac F1, not without a fight. Plus, lest we forget that there was rancor and back and forth. Checo Perez had a 2-year contract, ladies and gentlemen. Meaning that next year wasn't going to be his final year. His final year was going to be 2026. He had a 2-year contract inclusive of 25. That's where it gets techie. Christian Horner was asked. We'll get to why they extended him when they chose to extend him, because the timing is awfully techie. Some would say techier than techie things. The next question continues as follows. Why did you extend him, therefore, Craig Slater says, when you did, Christian Horner? And here's where we're going to have to deep dive this, because it is going to get techie. Oh, the humanity indeed, Champ 92. Christian Horner responds, at the time when we extended him, Checo had 4 podiums in 5 races. There'd already been too much unneeded, unnecessary speculation around the team. And of course, any contract that we sign, the timing's almost irrelevant because it will always have performance clauses and criteria baked into it. Let us unpick this, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm calling bull feathers and some of the stuff that Christian Horner's saying here. Factual, 4 podiums in 5 races, but you all know that's always been the way with Checo Perez. We've always covered that in the first quarter of the calendar. Checo Perez will always go well because it's those tracks, isn't it? Those low minimum speed, medium to long duration, Rascasse and bloody, it's Monaco and it's bloody do you know what I mean? These tracks around which Checo Perez will always excel. But the oldest story in Checo Perez history is that when he gets back to a Silverstone or he gets back to a Spa-Francorchamps, he will always struggle. So why? I don't know why we can't normalise for the very specific characteristics that we experience around the tracks at the front of the calendar. Very different from what you see in Q2, Q3 and Q4. So you can't expect Checo Perez to parlay good performance early on at his type of tracks into good performance later on in the calendar around the tracks that he will never let sell out. Do you know what I mean? He's never going to be brilliant at a Spa-Francorchamps because that doesn't suit his personality. Overlay with that the fact that the car didn't speak to him anyway. Max Verstappen wants an oversteery car, something that he can manipulate using the back end around these type of turns. Checo doesn't want that. He wants understeer predictability each and every single time. So how are we giving that dude a contract? Even though we know you've got Hannah Schmitz on the bloody grid. Like statistical whiz, do you know what I mean? She'd only need to look at the numbers and see the trend each and every single year that Checo starts off as a front runner and looks like he's going to be a world champion and then all of a sudden falls off. There is a reason for that, Christian Horner. So I don't accept that as a thesis B. Mendon, you're an absolute legend. Far too kind. Thank you for the amount of work you put in, says Javier. Javier, you're a legend and far too generous as always. And again, listen, we're building a community here, so we've got to speak to the issues at hand in earnest in a way that's true and fair, because what we'll never do on this channel ever is sacrifice truth, value and objectivity at the altar of partisanship, recency bias, nor confirmation bias. Go on and let's piece out this Christian Horner thing, because I think he said some other things in here that I don't like about the timing of the extension. He said there'd already been some much unneeded speculation around the team. What's he talking about, chat? Do you remember? Earlier on in the season, at this time when they extended Checo Perez, what was happening at the Bulls that are red? Non-rhetorical question that I'll answer. Of course it was misconduct gate, wasn't it? Is when the PA allegedly accused him of misconduct in the workplace. That's what was going on. Earlier on this season, in Q1 in particular, it was doubtful whether Christian Horner was going to continue as team principal of Red Bull Racing pending the outcomes of these investigations. That's what was going on, ladies and gentlemen. It was nothing if not rancor and beef and stakes and disenchantment and friction, of course, in principle, between Jos Verstappen, father of Max, the jewel in the Red Bull crown, and Christian Horner, the team principal of the Bulls that are red. That's what it was. So what they didn't need is any additional instability on top of that. He's right when he said there was a lot of much unneeded speculation around the team, but by dint of the accusations of the PA that Adrian Newey shared with Christian Horner, that's what was going on, and that's why they didn't need any unnecessary, not any additional nor incremental speculation and rumour around the team. Hence why that's the reason Christian Horner, because you already had the sword of Damocles dangling over your head. And indeed, if you wanted to cling on to power as you ultimately needed, as you ultimately managed to, then what you needed to do is settle on some solid ground. In order to make the ground more solid, that is the Bulls that are red as a team, you needed to sign Checo Perez too. You'll remember this. They asked, again, it was rancor between Jos Verstappen, father of Max, by the way, for some say soon to be 5-time champion, and Christian Horner on opposite sides of that fence. You'll remember there was one driver who, when asked to give his unequivocal support of team principal Christian Horner, there was one Red Bull driver who offered his unequivocal support verbally. That driver had a name, ladies and gentlemen, and that chap's name is Checo Perez, formerly known as the Mexican Minister of Defense. Max wouldn't do it, because when Mohammed Ben Sulayem implored Max Verstappen to come out and speak in the support of one Christian Horner in the midst of all of the allegation and misconduct gate PA settings, Max Verstappen said, I'm not going to come out and talk against my father. You're not going to put me in a position that's diametrically opposed to Jos Verstappen, the man who made me, the man who got me to where I am in F1, the man who's enabled me, facilitated my career. You're never going to get me to come out and speak against my dad. What do you mean? Mohammed Ben Sulayem? Are you asking me to do that? Max Verstappen's not doing that. Ergo, Christian Horner was after supporters in the team, right? And Checo Perez was that, a much needed life jacket when Christian Horner and his career and the Bulls that were red as far as their performance in absolute terms were all at sea. That's why they had to sign him, ladies and gentlemen, allegedly, if indeed we're putting on our investigative caps and connecting the dots. Much needed speculation, mate. Much needed allegation and misconduct, allegedly. That's what you're talking about. Any contract, he says, has performance clauses and criteria. Well, there's been much speculation around this, some saying that there were no performance clauses earlier on in the season. You'll recall that the chat was that if we went into the summer break, critical points at the championship, and Checo Perez was more than 5 places behind Max Verstappen and all more than 100 points even adrift of his teammate, then they could null and void his contract with immediate effect. Although, after having spoken allegedly to Liberty Media, having had a word after the documentary Noted in Das Cabrón, which celebrates Checo Perez's not insubstantial resilience, and with Singapore and Baku approaching, why would you get rid of Checo Perez then? before the Grand Prix, the circuits around which historically have passed his prologue, he has been God tier. It didn't make any sense. If you're going to get rid of him, you get rid of him during the summer break. Liberty Media et al. Implored Red Bull Racing not to. So then it's timing. He continues. Craig Slater says, how did Checo Perez lose his way? If once upon a time he was God tier, MBS is a disgrace, says Champ 92. I think we're singing from the same hymn sheet there. Michael says, makes sense to have low influence second driver. Checo's money brought him too much relevance in it. We'll talk to the successors or the potential candidates. At least we will get to that. I think you'll find it interesting, this Christian Horner interview. When did he lose his way? How did he lose his way? Because for the avoidance of doubt, once upon a time, Checo Perez was very, very good. You remember his defence of Sir Lewis Hamilton, a fire-breathing, on-rushing Sir Lewis Hamilton at Turkey in 2021. So too, 21 Abu Dhabi. Some argue that but for Checo Perez's defence of Sir Lewis that day, that Maximilian Verstappen would be a 3-time champion, not a 4-time one, because 2021 would have gone in favour of Lewis Hamilton. Maximilian Verstappen almost said as much over the radio in 21 at Abu Dhabi, saying of Checo Perez that Checo is an absolute legend. Maximilian Verstappen's words, not me own. So what's happened? Craig Slater said, once upon a time he was a fire-breathing dragon of an F1 driver going from last to first et al. But what's happened between now and then? Christian Horner answers as follows. He's not quite sure. He couldn't figure it out. The car became more narrow as far as its performance window. Optimising for it became more difficult, not least after Adrian Newey even defended and vacated, going across the new pastures anew. The harder you try sometimes, says Christian Horner, as far as trying to recover your prime and your form as an F1 driver. Sometimes, Christian says, sadly for Checo Perez, the slower you go, that your prime, that your speed, that lap time is like a gaseous substance now. The more that you try and grab onto it, the more that it slips through your fingers, and that this became something of a doom cycle for Checo Perez. He says there was flashes in Baku. He looked good for a while, but ultimately amounted to nothing because the F1 gods, the racing gods, by this time had turned their back on him. Of course, by dint of his multitudinous shout-outs, indiscretions verbally on the Instagrams and Twitter. My words, not Christian Horner's, by the way. He goes, Craig Slater asked the question, why not move him around? Why not just drop him down to VCARB as you did in a previous life with one Pierre Gasly, let's say? Christian Horner responds to us, and I've got things to say about this. He says, at this stage of Checo Perez's career, we don't think that was appropriate. Junior program settings, remember, you've got onrushing Hadjar, you've got Liam Lawson too, you've got Yuki Tsunoda, you've got Arvin Lindblad coming up soon, who they very much favour, appreciate him, say that potentially, if there were even a next Max Verstappen, such a thing as the Arvin Lindblad could be that. Christian Horner responds, at this stage of his career, Checo's, that's not appropriate. His decision was his decision to take a sabbatical, and we fully support it. Let's talk about this contract stuff, because for those that are in the know, going to drop some bars here but just between us. Don't share this information outside of this circle, please. Do you know what I mean? Not in a public forum. I have it on good authority that in Checo Perez's contract, it was ironclad as far as them not being able to demote him. He was not a Red Bull driver. What I mean by that is a Red Bull driver normally, a la Gasly or an Albon, they can point at either RB Visa Cash App or at Red Bull Racing, the head team. They're interchangeable. Rumour has it, again, I have it on good faith. Sources say that Checo Perez's contract, inbuilt within it, was that he could only drive for Red Bull Racing, that they couldn't demote him down to RB Visa Cash App. That's what Christian Horner's alluding to. He's telling us that without telling us that, isn't he? Kenny, you're a legend. I know I'm late, Cam. Do you remember when we were arguing about Checo's weight in January? Well, the year seems to have... Kenny, I'm telling you, chap. Go on, let's talk about this before we finish off with Christian Horner. I will link it on the community tab at some point. I will link this video. As I was going away and doing some due diligence, trying to upskill for my historical F1 knowledge, I was sorting through archived footage that I have on my hard drive here, and I happened across this. There's a video called Checo Perez something. Clicked on it. You wouldn't even recognise this dude. This is Checo Perez when he first signed the contract to join Red Bull Racing, a young, hungry lion. His face is gaunt. You know, like when Max Verstappen came back from the winter break last year, and you could just see his cheekbones. That was proof positive that the dude had been training right every single day. Diet on point. Checo Perez was once upon a time that you could see his cheekbones like this. He looked like a fire-breathing dragon of an F1 driver in this footage. And again, this is just Checo Perez when he's just talking about, he was doing some promo, right, talking about the challenge of driving for Red Bull when he first joined. He was in peak condition, not a smidgen of overweight to him. And now look. And again, I'm not one to fat shame. Look at me. You can't see my jawbones. You know what I mean? I've definitely got a lot of weight to lose if I'm going to get to proper match fitness. But then, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, I'm not a bloody F1 driver. And that's the point. We're not fat shaming by talking the truth. And Kenny, you're absolutely bloody right, mate. Absolutely bloody right. And thank you again. You're too generous, Kenny. But if you're going to take this thing seriously, this is the Max Verstappen thesis, right? There is a tax to be paid if indeed you harbour aspirations of winning races and therefore championships. One of which is to keep yourself in good nick, get 8 hours sleep, eat the right foods, don't have bloody McDonald's, drink lots of water, don't drink fizzy drinks, make sure you come in because there's lap time in weight. Nico Rosberg told us this now, that his favourite exercise was to get on the old Peloton. Get on the bike and nail it. And because of that, his leg muscles became more defined than they need be. He said instantly he realised that there was lap time in weight. He just sacked off cycling, even though it was his favourite exercise. Took off the paint off the bloody helmet. That's why you see in 2016, Nico Rosberg is driving around with an all-black carbon fibre helmet. Because there was lap time in there. The heavier that all your bloody stuff is. Do you know what I mean? Nico Rosberg out here redesigning the steering wheel and all this crazy stuff. And I just think, I'm not sure I'm not sure Checo Perez and a couple of us on the grid, as at December 2024, not that they're not aware of the tax that needs to be paid, but whether they're prepared to pay it. The tax that, again, is necessary to win races and championships, to be a success, to be the best person that you can be and best F1 driver that you can be. You just need to go and compare and contrast. I might tweet it out, a compare and contrast of Checo Perez now, as at December of 2024, as versus Checo Perez when he first joined Red Bull, right? If you see his face, he's like, he must be like 3 or 4 kilograms like lighter then than he is now. He must be. He absolutely must be. And so I don't know. It's techie. Christian Horner, Craig Slater asks, who's next then? If Checo Perez won't be there next year, who will be? Christian Horner responds, over the past couple of weeks, we've acquired all the information we need to make the decision. It will be one of Yuki Tsunoda or Liam Lawson. Yuki, he said, has tested in Abu Dhabi recently. Engineers we know were super impressed by the texture and colour, the length and breadth of his technical feedback. They didn't expect that from Yuki Tsunoda, hence why he impressed them so much. He says, Liam Lawson has driven really well in the 6 races that he's had. We will come to a decision in the coming days. Well, Christian Horner, I will see you that and raise you this. I think 99% of the F1 community knows that decision has been made already. Just like the Checo Perez one had, pending the hashing out of the mutual contract cessation agreement. They've decided, listen, I'll put my neck on the line here. If I were a betting man, they've decided Liam Lawson for a couple of different reasons. Every time I hear them talk, when I say them, I'm talking about Helmut Marko and Christian Horner. Every time I hear them talk about Yuki Tsunoda, it is expression with concern. It's concern about his mental fortitude. It's concern about his destabilising impact potentially on the team, and more pertinently and specifically, Maximilian Verstappen. You've heard them talk already about unneeded destabilisation. That they didn't need any more rumour and speculation around the team. That's indeed one of the reasons why they gave They made a bad decision and gave Checo Perez the contract in the first instance. So you mean to tell me that they're going to go against reverse 180 on that thesis to give Yuki Tsunoda one? You must be... It's too soon. Chat, I'm telling you, it's far too soon. That misconduct gate and Christian Horner nearly losing his job and all that stuff, he doesn't need that smoke again. And in their minds, at the very least, they will associate that sort of destabilisation impact, potentially drip feeding, permeating onto Maximilian Verstappen. They will associate that. They do associate that even with one Yuki Tsunoda. Anatomy of a champion on Viaplay, courtesy of Amazon Prime. Go back and watch that, and all they're talking about, whenever you hear Yuki, the words that follow, are you going to see a sports psychologist so concerned about that word there? Now, Helmut Marko said that Yuki's become more consistent, more level-headed, but I just don't think it's enough. I think the biggest problem that Yuki Tsunoda has is Liam Lawson. Again, level-headed, more level-headed. I don't think he's the most level-headed on the grid. We see his interaction with Fernando Alonso this season, but I think he's more of a known entity than Yuki Tsunoda, who has the ability to go a bit off-piste from time to time. And plus, we've already talked about this, right? Where was Christian Horner, Freudian slip, when Yuki Tsunoda was testing in Abu Dhabi? Nowhere to be bloody seen, chat. Pierre Vacher again, hair to Adrian Newey's throne, head aerodynamicist settings. Where was he? Went home, probably got on the same private jet as Christian Horner to get back there. If indeed you think, can you imagine if Max Verstappen was testing, or Arvin Lindblad? They would have been all there watching, keenly taking notes. Christian Horner, Pierre Vacher, similarly, et al., each and every single one of the senior stakeholders, they would have been there to observe in real time because it would have been that important. By not being there, they are conspicuous in their absence. That tells you all they need to know. Yuki Tsunoda was testing, Horner wasn't there, Pierre Vacher neither, and I think that tells you all you need to know about who they favour going forward into 2025. Liam Lawson, for the avoidance of doubt. Ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, he, the Kiwi, has the whip hand. Craig Slater asked the question, Honda won't stand in the way. This is going to be purely a driving decision, is it, Christian? Honda, of course, sponsor Yuki Tsunoda to the tune of $10 million a year. That's how much goes into Red Bull coffers, courtesy of their relationship with Yuki Tsunoda, by dint of his relationship by extension with Honda. Craig Slater says it's just purely a driving decision then. Like, it has nothing to do with Honda. He says, we need everybody firing on all cylinders. That's right. This is a driving decision. You remember earlier this season, Christian Horner said of Checo Perez, the predicament posed to him by the Mexican Minister of Defense. He said that we can't continue to run a race on one leg. Now this time he talks about 2025, saying of Ferrari, they'll have Charles and Lewis. Saying of McLaren, we see what they had to offer this year in the partnership that is Lando Norris and Oscar Jack. That next year Mercedes will have themselves George and Kimi. They'll all be firing on all cylinders, and so we cannot therefore afford not to. He says, do you regret? Correct, Craig Slater asking the questions on deck, by the way, and you can catch this interview on Sky Sports F1 now, if of course you're in the UK. He says to Christian Horner, the big elephant in the room, do you regret not signing Carlos Sainz? Again, one of the truly good ones, if not great ones, massive pedigree. You would sign yourself, if you're a team principal on the F1 grid, surely you would sign yourself a Carlos Sainz Jr., if not just for the colour of the technical feedback, surely. Cameron said, Cameron, your cheekbones don't show. Must be the camera. Francois, it's not the camera angle. It's me being overweight, chap, is what it is. I'll lean into that. I've got no way to... I haven't got a dog in this fight, Francois. Do you know what I mean? I'm massively hypocritical for criticising Carlos Checo Perez. But the point is, I'm not an F1 driver. If I were, you can best believe that... In fact, I'll tell you what, in a few months, Francois, we'll have another conversation. You know what I mean? New Year's resolution. Perez jettisoned from the balls that are red. Let's go, bro. It had to be done. I really like the young guns, but it seems like Bottas will be perfect next to Max if he's shot. You know, modern day, John, it's a good shout. You know, there was a brilliant article. I want to say it's The Race that put this together. They did a I want to say, I think it was the Race or Autosport. They did an analysis, a very lengthy and deep dive analysis on who on the current grid, as far as their race pace and qualifying pace, will be best suited if meritocracy is, if those are the waters in which we're wading. And the conclusion was that Valtteri Bottas would be the guy. Plenty quick enough. It's just that Sauber, you have to normalise for the fact that the Sauber car that he's been driving has been an SH1T box. Super interesting. Horner was at Ricciardo's testing. Silverstone G-Man last year. He absolutely attended Silverstone in person. And that's past his prologue, right? If it matters, of course Horner's going to be there. He was there anyway. He just needed to stay another 48 hours. I think that might be proof positive. Not definitive proof, but an indication as to what Horner and Marco stayed, by the way, because Yuki Tsunoda now is Marco's guy. You hear that Marco talks glowingly about him. I think this is not dissimilar to the Nick de Vries decision. You remember there was divergence as far as Marco and Horner. I want to say that Horner didn't fancy Nick de Vries, whereas Marco was like, get this guy in. Helmut Marko later then said, you know what, I made a bad decision. I will take this L. I will hold this corn, because Nick de Vries didn't have the minerals. And I think it's something similar here. I suspect that Marco, it's a little bit different though, because it's a decision between two junior drivers. I suspect Marco's backing Yuki Tsunoda because he said that he was really impressed. But when pressed, I'm not sure that Marco wouldn't also choose Liam Lawson. I think they have consensus, and I think that's why Lawson would potentially get the promotion. You're a legend, Jomo, RLJ. Sainz in that Red Bull would have been a wildish. Go on, let's talk about Sainz, because that's very apropos. Do you regret not signing Carlos Sainz? Craig Slater of Sky Sports F1 asks. He says, Carlos is a great driver, says Horner, but sometimes you've got to look at all criteria and dynamics. What does he mean by that, ladies and gentlemen? He's been quite specific with his words there. Has Horner, team principal of the Bulls that are red. You've got to look at all criteria and all dynamics. Of course, he's alluding to the fact that in 2015, 2016, Carlos Sainz Jr. and Max Verstappen were teammates at Toro Rosso under the team principalship of Juan Franz Tost. There is a very famous story that we've talked about on this channel before. 2015 at Monaco. I want to say 2015 Monaco. Might be 2016. No, 2015 at Monaco. Max Verstappen was sent out late in qualifying. Jos Verstappen said, mate, that's exactly how my career ended. What you're not going to do is put undue pressure, unnecessary pressure, to use Christian Horner's terminology, on my son, Max Verstappen. You're not going to suffocate his talent by not giving him the space requisite, the racing room even, pun intended, to grow and deliver and execute for his not insubstantial upside potential. You're not going to do that to my son. So here's what you do, Helmut Marko. Sort it out and make sure that his side of the garage act in a way that's in his best interest. Franz Tost, team principal of Toro Rosso at the time, said that's not happening. We act in a way that's uniform across both sides of the grid. What I say goes. Dr. Helmut Marko said, you know what, chaps, engineers, pit crew, strategic bods over at Max Verstappen's side of that Toro Rosso team, you take orders from me now. Don't listen to team principal Franz Tost. You listen to me, because Max Verstappen could potentially be the next one. But what we don't need, we can't afford to cheese off Jos, and we can't afford to suffocate that chap's talent by putting pressure on him in a way that's unnecessary and undue. That's what he said. That's what Helmut Marko's intervention was. That's what it was then. And you know what the joke is? Some of those pit crew acted in a way, they started listening to Helmut Marko. When Franz Tost found out no messing with Franz Tost, he fired them instantly. What did Helmut Marko do? Went and found them jobs up and down the paddock, particularly at Red Bull Racing, the big team. This is the sort of politics, the sort of friction that was born of having Carlos Sainz Sr. and his steed Jr. and Jos Verstappen and his steed Max Verstappen all in one stable. It didn't work then, and they were fledgling F1 drivers, brand new to the space. So how do you think that would work out now, 10 years, almost 10 years later? Big egos, four-time champion Max Verstappen. Jos Verstappen now emboldened in his position as advisor to Max Verstappen, his son. Carlos Sainz Sr., older and wiser. So too his steed, Carlos Sainz Jr. How do you think it would work out now? That's what Christian Horner is alluding to when he says sometimes, quote, you got to look at all criteria and all dynamics. They realised that they'd be on a hiding to nothing if indeed they were going to bring in Carlos Sainz. Of course, Carlos Sainz, of the drivers available, if indeed we're wading in the very murky waters of meritocracy F1. Of course, Carlos Sainz Jr. was the best driver that was available. But again, do you want to bring him in and cheese off Max Verstappen, four-time, soon-to-be five-time champion? So absolutely flipping not. Not in a month of Sundays. He says, when we extended Checo's contract, remember, lest we forget, he'd finished on the podium in the first 4 of 5 races. And at that time, he was second in the Drivers' Championship. We've addressed that already. It gets too techie. Don't tell me he was... At what point in the season was he second in the Drivers' Championship? Because if it's in the first 5 races, then of course, he always goes well in the first 5 races because those circuits suit the way in which he likes to drive the car. He likes those corners. No, he performs well at those corners. He's a real limited guy. He excels. The parameters necessary to minimise for lap time on combined exit suit. No, speak to Checo Perez, who he is as a driver. But after the first 5 races, we go back to Europe, right? And it's Silverstone and it's Spa and it's Hungary and it's Austria. And for the most part, that handling dynamic is a weakness, or that no longer is an advantage. It is a weakness. Any driver will struggle next to Max, but Sainz was the best option for Red Bull. I don't disagree, Daniel. I know it was the best option, but he's had lulls across the... I know Carlos isn't perfect. I back Carlos Sainz. I really wanted him to beat Charles desperately, but he's not. He's no... You know what I mean? As much as I'd wish to say that Carlos Sainz is better than modern day journalist, he's not. He's not. He just doesn't have that. I don't know. He doesn't have whatever that X factor is that Checo Perez has, that Charles Leclerc has. I just don't think Carlos is as fast. Not in absolute terms. Not point to point, A to B. He just will never have that. And that's something when Charles is fighting whoever, it'll be Lewis next year, but when he was fighting Carlos, he could just, so long as he's had his Weetabix and got his 8 hours, so long as he's played his way accordingly into the crease, he can bank on his pace 9 times out of 10 to just be faster than Carlos Sainz, right? Unless he makes a bloody mistake of the unforced error variety. Do you know what I mean? The divergence between the driving preference of Max and Carlos Sainz may be too large. Just like they've done with Checo. Just build the car. You're always going to build the car around Max. Adrian Newey talks about this in his book, I think. That you just build the fastest car, and the fastest driver, by dint of their adaptability or their ability to adapt even, will be able to drive it. For they say that it's not the strongest of the species that survive, but it's the most adaptable to change. The divergence between Max and Carlos Sainz may be too large. Max drives oversteer and Carlos... Does Carlos prefer more understeer, G-Man? I don't know about that. Maybe more than Max. I was listening to the book Unstoppable, and there's a really good stanza where Marcus talks about Max, the comfort that Max finds in allowing the rear to float around him on low speed, medium to long duration corners. Let's say Raskas an example. Do you remember Sector 3 a couple of moons ago, Monaco? Do you remember when Max Verstappen all of a sudden made up 3/10 on Fernando Alonso in Sector 3, which by the way is like 20 seconds long? If you look on the last corner, I want to say it is Raskas, isn't it? And the way that Max Verstappen straight lines it, like tight lines the corner, he's doing something very clever on the throttle. He's exacerbating, he's mitigating for understeer in real time. It's super clever and very difficult to explain. But the way that Marcus says that there is, it suits Max's driving style to have a bit of wiggle room on the rear, super pointy on the front end, but be able to work your magic. Do you know what I mean? Have a bit of margin error for margin. I can't remember the terminology. Clearly, we've been streaming far too live. Have a bit of wiggle room on the rear, particularly on these low speed, medium to long durations. Raskas is your perfect example. The Max Verstappen he brakes. some say he breaks early, some say he breaks late, depending on who you're talking to. But it's what he does at the apex, right? He has this ability, like Mark Hughes says, to allow the rear to float around him, which mitigates for these inherently understeery ground effect cars. That's Max's gift, and I think Mark Hughes puts it better than I ever could. But of Carlos Sainz, he says, sometimes you've got to look at the criteria. We extended Checo Perez's... When Checo had finished fourth, when Checo Perez, had finished on the podium for the first 4 or 5 races, that's when we extended him. By the way, to extend him 2 years, I love playing devil's advocate, but I just can't see it with that. 2 years, like what? In what world? I think this is. Listen, I remember Checo Perez coming out and saying that I support Christian Horner unequivocally in his time as need. And I just remember thinking that's Christian Horner has to repay that debt. Lannisters always pay their debts even. And I think Christian Horner giving him a 2-year was so extreme, given his performance over the past couple of years. Remember, they only finished 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship once. They've had the top car like 22, definitely 23. Like what is he doing? It's nonsense. I think it was an extreme. Lannister always pays his debts. Do you know what I mean? It's an extreme instance of that by giving him 2 years, 25 and 26, and then allowing him to bake into his contract, allegedly, if we're talking, the fact that they can't demote him to RB Visa Cap, mate. Oh, don't do it. Finally, on Christian Horner, he said this. Craig Slater asked him, should you have won the World Constructors' Championship? No kidding, Sherlock. Of course you could have. Of course you could and should have. Should have. Christian Horner answered the question. Should have, would have, could have. Last words of a fool, right? Hindsight is always 2020. Even anybody can be a Monday morning quarterback. At the end of the day, though, and this is the title of this video, is a function of this sentence. And again, this is how Christian Horner, team principal of Red Bull, chose to end his soliloquy. He says, at the end of the day, we won more races this season. We won 9. We had the most poles. We won 4 sprints, which is more than any other team. We won the Drivers' Championship with 2 races to go. Unfortunately, though, we had a 280-point deficit between our drivers. And of course, here's where it gets techie and techie things, chat. And of course, that became quite expensive in terms of the Constructors' Championship. Do you see the use of the word expensive? $16 million any is how much they were paying Checo Perez. 5 million, an additional incremental 5 million is how much they had to fork out and lose from the cost cap by dint of Checo Perez's crash damage in 2024. 20 million is how much they lost in the Constructors' Championship by finishing 3rd instead of where they should have finished, which of course was 1st place if Maximilian Verstappen's performances were anything to go by. Expensive. What an objective. What an adjective to use by Christian Horner. Of course, that became, you could have said there was a gazillion adjectives that he could have chosen. Unfortunate, disadvantaged. He chose expensive. This was material from Checo Perez as far as his underperformance, that they lost money, that the team were losing motivation. The team even lost 40% of their bonus. Expensive is the word that Christian Horner should be using about Checo Perez's material underperformance and the impact it had on Red Bull Racing in 2024. It's techie, chat. It is very techie, but it is what it is, sadly. I will go on and let me read out a couple more and then we'll close. Horner is right. It worked for the team. Did it work for the team? Look, let me tell you this, Michael. There is no way in a month of Sundays that Checo Perez gets that contract if Christian Horner wasn't in all sorts of allegation misconduct gate. There is no way. If it were a normal season in 2024 for Christian Horner and he wasn't on the precipice of losing his job, there is no way in a month of Sundays in hell that Checo Perez gets offered a 2-year contract, maybe a one-year extension, but there's no way that dude has a 24-month contract that only expires at the end of 2026. No way. No way. He's been very fortuitous, and I think they would have had to pay him something, okay? He's got to be an ambassador or so. They would have had to settle something. There would have been some money exchanged. They would have done the calculations though. And into that agreement, they would have baked in all of the aforementioned numbers. The 20 million that he's cost them as far as the Constructors' Championship, the 5 million that he's cost them in terms of damage, all of the bloody heartache costing the boys and girls at Milton Keynes back at the factory, circa 40% of their bonus. Do you know what I mean? Tequila can't help that. And I say that, of course, because Checo Perez bought 2,000 bottles of tequila for the fact. It's like, no, I want my bonus. Do you know what I mean? Both drivers, Yuki and Liam, are young. Which driver can adapt to Max's driving style and maximise speed from a point? I don't know the answer to that question. That's the $64,000 exam question, isn't it, G-Man? I don't know which one of those two drivers. I think here's. Let me put the supposition forth this way. I think Liam Lawson potentially, because he's. I mean, how many races has he had total? Yuki's been in F1 a while, so if we're talking about upside potential, then you go Liam, right? Because I mean, he's holding his own broad. If we're looking at the time delta rather than the head-to-head, Liam Lawson hasn't been a gazillion miles away from Yuki Tsunoda, and that's got to mean something, particularly if you anticipate, as we should, if past his prologue, that Liam Lawson will continue improving potentially at a vaster, more expeditious rate than Yuki Tsunoda by dint of his lack of experience. I think I'd answer your question that I wouldn't know how adapting. I don't know. You can't tell. Although they were impressed by Yuki, when he jumped in the RB20. So I just don't know. I tell you what, there is a joker in this pack that we need to consider. Helmut Marko gave an interview, and he was talking about Arvin Lindblad, 17-year-old, young, hungry lion, Red Bull Junior. He said of Arvin that what they weren't looking for was another Max Verstappen, because you may not, in brackets, you may not find another one of those ever. That might be unreasonable, no, unrealistic. What they're looking for is another F1 champion. And he said very specifically that he thinks that Arvin Lindblad, as far as their portfolio of Red Bull Junior drivers, Helmut Marko, this is what came out of his mouth, that he thinks Arvin Lindblad might be the next one. Not Isaac Hadjar. Liam Lawson wasn't mentioned. Yuki Tsunoda, it was Arvin Lindblad. That was the one who Helmut Marko thought would be the next one. He talked about some of his drives when he's come from last to first, being reminiscent of Maximilian Verstappen. Then when he spoke to him again, if you read the book Unstoppable, Mark Hughes talks about a time when Helmut Marko, in fact, it's Helmut Marko talking on Anatomy of a Champion, isn't it? Helmut Marko talks about the time when he interviewed Max Verstappen when he was only a young pup, and that they were testing him on different Red Bull bits and bobs, the size of the company, how many employees they had. And Max Verstappen had all of these bits and bobs, these key bits of information at hand. He's ready to go, interview prepped. And Helmut Marko said the same thing about Arvin Lindblad. Now, I know they're not trying to draw the comparisons to Maximilian Verstappen, but I feel like it's a Freudian slip by Helmut Marko referencing exactly the same reason why he was so impressed by Max Verstappen so early on into their meeting. I think they fancy Arvin. And even I think he said, go on and catch this, Arvin Lindblad will be racing F2 next year. And I think in this interview, Helmut Marko insinuated that Arvin Lindblad could be ready for F1 as soon as 2026. What does that mean for Isaac Hadjar? I think that means that they don't rate him. Speak to anybody about Isaac Hadjar and nobody. Every time he gets, okay, so he was brilliant in F2, very nearly won the championship last year. But every time he's gotten into an F1 car in an FP1 session, you just see the Red Bull racing guys on the pit wall. They're just like, I just don't think they rate him. I think this is one of those rare ones where Behrman and Kimi Antonelli transitioned seamlessly from the F2 car, even saying, I think Behrman said this right, that an F2 car is more difficult to drive than a 2024 spec F1 car. Their transition was almost seamless, so much time, so many 10,000 hours have they spent in the sim hitherto erstwhile. Now though, I think you get the exception to the rule in Isaac Hadjar that his adaptation from F2 spec cars to F1 different. He struggled. The speed, And again, the way that Marcuse addresses it right in his Unstoppable book when he's talking about Max Verstappen is the way that you measure these young drivers. They will always be mistakes, right? Colapinto is proof positive of that. Kimi Antonelli, Italian Grand Prix FP1 2024. These young Hungary lions will always make mistakes by dint of pushing too hard, inexperience, not building a week, not planning out. Do you know what I mean? Not managing forward, project managing a race weekend per se. Young Hungry Lions will always do that. Indeed, you could argue that that's the cost, the effervescence of youth as a soon-to-be F1 driver. But Marcuse argues the way that you measure how good a young driver can be is how bright their flame burns at any one particular time. Kimi Antonelli was perfect, right? The minimum speed that he took through the Ascari chicane and Lesmo 2 in Italy shows you that Kimi Antonelli has something all through that FP session. Even at the end, he did his time at the start, right? Even at the end of that free practice session, nobody was within even 11 kilometers an hour of the minimum speed of Kimi Antonelli. That tells you that that's potential double underlined, is it not? And that's what Toto the Boy Who Cried Wolf and Mercedes are keen to click on and access going into 2025, hopefully. But Isaac Hadjar, apparently, I don't know, everybody thinks differently. Everybody thinks differently. Oh, and by the way, if we're talking about Arvin Lindblad, Christian Horner chimed in, right? This is one of the rare times when Christian and Helmut Marko are aligned. They have an opinion convergence or convergence of opinions, even as far as Lindblad. When Toto Wolff was trying to get special dispensation and navigate around the super license, the Max Verstappen super license rule for one Kimi Antonelli, saying therefore that he wants Kimi Antonelli to be able to jump in a car at 17 years old before his birthday, which was on the same week that the Monza Grand Prix was on. That's the reason why they wanted to reduce that or mitigate, gain special mitigating circumstances that was going to allow Kimi Antonelli to jump in that car. Christian Horner said it's not Kimi Antonelli what you need that rule for, it's Arvin Lindblad. They are looking to test him next year in FP1 because they think he could be the next one, and that's how it will play out, ladies and gentlemen. Liam Lawson will hear the news imminently, so says one Christian Horner. Checo Perez, ding dong, the which is DEAD. It's sad. It is sad, but I feel like by dint of some of the chat, the verbiage, the bloody being a bit too into yourself, posting those bloody memes of the Wolf of Wall Street, I'm not going anywhere. Well, how do you feel about that now? Checo Perez, oh, the humanity.